Catus Maximus here, this time with a review and comparison of the Stanley FatMax Carpenters Chisels set. Actually, this isn't the full set or the full range of these chisels, but I have three of the most common sizes, which is a 1/2 inch 3/4 and 1 1/4. I have several different chisels to also compare these to, and I've had these for a few years. I have used them, lightly, but wanted just to kind of show people how these hold up. One of the reasons you would get a Stanley chisel is because they have been an institution for over half a century. Pretty much, if you went to any construction site from the 1960s all the way up through, not so much today, but through the into the 2000s, pretty much half of everybody would have Stanley chisels. More specifically, it would be styles like this, and we'll compare them to these classic ones here. Some nice upgrades, although it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes I like the small handled chisels. These are large, oversized handles with heavy-duty rubber overmolding. One big upgrade to these is that they have a solid steel shank going all the way through. So it's a chisel where the acrylic handle is not taking any of the load when you're hitting it. And that is a big deal. That makes the chisel much heavier duty. I mean, it is a substantial upgrade, and it's one of the reasons these are so much more expensive. Although I will mention, over time, it seems this rubber overmolding has started to contract, and that's not a cut, it's actually a crack. Because if we look at this one, they both have near identical cracks in the same spot. So it makes me worry that this rubber overmolding is going to eventually peel off, which wouldn't be such a big deal. The other thing about these Stanley FatMaxes and why they're called that is they have a very, very thick beam. This beam at the top here is over 1/4 inch thick, and it has a slight taper down to where the edge bevel is. They are a good hardened steel. I have chipped this one a little bit. A word of advice is to not try to sharpen chisels on a grinder, but to use a stone. You're going to have much better results, because the big deal about chisels is having a sharp edge. I'm not a chisel master, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate some of the complex shaping operations that you can do with chisels, but they're great for any kind of wood and plastic, even aluminum, for fine shaving and shaping. They're also what I tend to use for gasket scraping. I get so tired of things that are intended as gasket scrapers. It's not really working. You just got to be careful with the chisel, and the nice sharp hard edge actually peels gaskets off of surfaces with a good amount of efficacy or effectiveness, and in a reasonable amount of time. An additional thing I like about these new ones is they now all come with these little holders that keep the blade centered and keep the tip nice and protected, and you can see that here. The laser etching is hit and miss. I'm not so fond of it. I do like stamping, but you have to take what you get. And they do plastic coat these so they won't corrode on the shelf. The only area that ends up getting exposed is the actual cutting surface, so I like that. So you have chisels that don't rust quite as much. Let's go and zoom out a little bit, and we'll go ahead and bring out some other chisels to compare these to. And just for the fun of it, we'll compare it to one of these new ones here. These are where the classic. My father had done construction for his whole life, and so these are the chisels I always remember. I almost thought all chisels were exactly this style, and I happened to find some new in the package, which is pretty rare considering that these were made in 1987. So this is a new in the package, 31 years old. Voila, there's your unboxing. Not a big deal. So we'll go and compare these to what was the original Stanley Professional, the tried and true. I've almost never seen these handles really break on these old ones, and that's one thing I did want to point out. Even though the new ones have these full steel shanks, which are awesome, these have proven to be quite reliable. And the little curve, a lot of times I like that. I like the smaller, more compact head on these. Now, if we compare the beam thickness here, I wonder if we can see that. Come on, camera. The FatMaxes are only slightly large, slightly thicker than the old school Professional ones. Stanley has a revised new edition. This is what replaced these, and they're pretty much exactly the same beam thickness, although I do like that the older models did have a deeper bevel on the side of the blade. Continuing on, if we're going to take and compare like the FatMax against a more standard chisel, this would be a Task Force brand, then we can start really seeing where that, if this camera will focus, there you go, the beam's thickness really starts to come into play, and so it makes it a more rigid chisel and makes it a little nicer to operate. If we compare to other more professional brands such as this Cobalt, which isn't bad, it's a little thicker. The Cobalt would just be considered a standard thickness. The Cobalt also is not a through shank like these Stanley FatMaxes. And then we have, of course, a traditional Buck Brothers, which was the big competition to these Stanleys, vintage Stanleys back in the day. And what is surprising is the Buck Brothers were pretty darn thick, nearly as thick as a FatMax is now. So that's all Stanley's really doing with these FatMaxes, is just giving them a little thicker beam and making a solid steel shank so you can supposedly hit it really, really hard. But it doesn't make a huge difference when you're using a chisel. You're not hitting a chisel with a 5-pound hammer or a 10-pound sledge. And so I do like that. It just ends up making it a heavier tool, and I believe just a little bit unnecessarily expensive, considering how well traditional chisels have worked out, at least in my experience. Now, maybe under the most heavy-duty conditions, yeah, you were breaking the acrylic handles, but that's actually surprisingly rare. I mean, I've seen a lot of chisels that are just incredibly punished, have been sharpened to where the blade is an inch shorter than it was originally, and still the handles just keep going. That being said, I think I'll finish this up by saying that these are the heaviest duty chisels I've seen, is these FatMaxes. And if you really want a very stout chisel, these are one of the few options available. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out. I'm going to add a quick addendum here because the back of these original 1987 ones actually had some very nice tips that I should probably pass along, so I'll just slowly do it here so that you can read this text. And then everybody can really just kind of get an idea of exactly what Stanley was recommending to do and how to operate their chisels. Thank you so much again.